The Silent Vows is a powerful tale set in the Saint Aurelia Monastery in New England, where the discovery of broken vows among nuns and seminarians threatens the future of the sacred institution. Mother Abigail, compassionate yet firm leader, fights to rebuild trust and unity amidst scandal, tragedy, and judgment, with the looming threat of closure from Bishop Arthur. Abigail implements radical reforms, allowing love, redemption, and faith to guide the monastery toward a new path. Through struggles, heartbreak, and ultimate resilience, the monastery transforms into a beacon of hope and compassion, proving that faith evolves alongside humanity. What did you think of the Silent Vows? Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, DG Story, for more gripping tales of extraordinary love, faith, and redemption. Join our growing community today. The Saint Aurelia Monastery stood atop a hill shrouded in mist, its stone walls weathered by centuries of solitude. Nestled in the heart of New England, it was a place of devotion, discipline, and silence. Within these walls, Mother Abigail walked the dim corridors, her steps measured and firm. Despite the serenity that the monastery projected, Abigail felt a subtle shift in the air, a disturbance she couldn't yet name. One morning, the peaceful routine was interrupted. Sister Helena, one of the youngest and most devout nuns, fainted during morning prayers. Abigail, rushing to her aid, noticed the unusual pallor of Helena's face and the faint swell beneath her habit. Later in the infirmary, Abigail questioned Helena gently. "Helena, are you unwell? Have you been eating properly?" Helena's voice trembled. "I don't know what's wrong, Mother. I feel different, but I swear I've done nothing to break my vows." Abigail studied her with concern. Helena's fear was palpable, and Abigail wanted to believe her. Yet, a seed of doubt took root. In the following days, whispers began to spread. Helena was not the only one feeling unwell. Other nuns reported nausea, fatigue, and dizziness. In the dining hall one evening, Sister Agatha, the monastery's elder and staunch traditionalist, confronted Abigail. "This cannot go unnoticed, Mother Abigail," she said, her voice laced with judgment. "The sanctity of our vows is at stake. We must act immediately." Abigail, though unsettled, refused to act rashly. "Agatha, we will find the truth, but not by sowing fear among the sisters. Let us observe and investigate discreetly." Determined to uncover the truth, Abigail sought the counsel of Father Gregory, a priest from the nearby seminary. Gregory, younger and more progressive in his views, agreed to help but warned Abigail of the implications. "If the Church learns of this before we have answers, they may take extreme measures," Gregory said. Abigail nodded. "That's why we must be thorough and discreet, for the sake of the sisters and for the monastery." Abigail and Gregory decided to investigate the monastery's grounds. Late one evening, they examined old maps of the building. To their surprise, they discovered records of a hidden passage beneath the chapel, one that connected the monastery to the seminary miles away. The passage had been sealed for decades, but the idea that it could still exist sent a chill down Abigail's spine. The next night, under the cover of darkness, Abigail and Gregory ventured into the chapel. They searched behind the altar until they found a faint outline of a door. Its edges were worn, the stone cool to the touch. With a creak, they managed to push it open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. Abigail hesitated, gripping a lantern tightly. "This might explain more than we want to know," she said. "Then we'd better find out," Gregory replied, stepping ahead. The air grew colder as they descended, the damp stone walls pressing in around them. At the bottom, they found the entrance to a tunnel. It stretched endlessly into the distance, the faint sound of dripping water echoing in the silence. Abigail's mind raced with possibilities. Was this how the sisters had come to break their vows? But as they ventured deeper, Footsteps echoed faintly behind them. Abigail turned sharply, her lantern casting long, flickering shadows. No one was there, or so it seemed. The footsteps echoed faintly behind them again, each one sharper than the last. Abigail's breath caught in her throat as she turned, holding the lantern high. "Who's there?" Her voice rang out, firm but laced with unease. The tunnel remained silent, save for the dripping of water. Father Gregory, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer. "Let's move forward. We can't lose our nerve now," he said, his tone steady but his eyes darting warily to the shadows. They pressed on, their footsteps muffled by the damp stone beneath them. The tunnel seemed endless, the flickering light of their lanterns barely illuminating the way. Then, they came upon a door ancient and weathered, with iron hinges rusted by time. Gregory ran his hand along its surface, feeling the splinters and cracks. "It's been used recently," he murmured, pointing to the faint scuff marks on the ground where the door had been dragged open and shut. Abigail inhaled sharply. "So the passage is still active." With a firm push, Gregory opened the door. Beyond it was a small chamber with scattered remnants of candles, footprints in the dust, and faint traces of incense lingering in the air. In the center of the room lay a discarded rosary, its beads gleaming faintly in the dim light. "Someone has been meeting here," Abigail said, her voice low. She bent to pick up the rosary, recognizing the small engraving on the cross. It belonged to Sister Helena. Before they could speak further, a distant noise echoed down the tunnel, a muffled laugh, followed by hushed voices. Abigail and Gregory exchanged a tense glance. "Stay quiet," Gregory whispered. They extinguished their lanterns, plunging the chamber into darkness. The voices grew closer, accompanied by faint footsteps. Hiding behind a stone column, Abigail and Gregory waited, hearts pounding. Two figures entered the chamber, a young woman and a man. The dim glow of a candle revealed their faces. Sister Helena and Ethan, a seminarian from Gregory's seminary. Their laughter softened as they embraced, unaware of the hidden observers. Abigail's grip tightened on the rosary, her chest heavy with conflicting emotions. The sight was both tender and damning. Beside her, Gregory's expression darkened. "This explains everything," he whispered, "but it also raises more questions." As the couple sat together, their voices grew audible. "We can't keep meeting like this," Ethan said, his tone tinged with worry. "If anyone finds out," Helena placed a hand on his cheek, silencing him. "No one will. We're careful." Gregory shifted slightly, but the movement caused a faint scrape of stone. The sound was enough to catch Helena's attention. She froze, her eyes darting to the shadows. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. Realizing they had been discovered, Abigail stepped forward, her lantern casting a pale light over the room. Helena gasped, recoiling as if struck. Ethan rose quickly, shielding her with his body. "Mother Abigail," Helena whispered, her voice barely audible. Abigail's gaze swept over them, her expression unreadable. "You've broken your vows. Helena, do you understand what this means?" Tears welled in Helena's eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen. It doesn't matter what you meant," Gregory interjected, his voice cold. "What matters is what you've done." Ethan stepped forward, his posture protective. "If you're going to punish her, punish me too. I'm just as much to blame." Abigail raised a hand, silencing them both. "This is not the place for explanations. You'll both return with me to the monastery." Her tone left no room for argument. As they retraced their steps through the tunnel, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Helena's quiet sobs echoed in the confined space, while Ethan walked in silence, his face set with grim determination. Gregory, bringing up the rear, said nothing, though his disapproval was palpable. When they emerged back into the chapel, the first light of dawn was breaking through the stained glass windows. Abigail turned to Helena and Ethan, her expression stern but not unkind. "Rest now, but know this, there will be consequences. For both of you." Helena nodded weakly, clinging to Ethan's arm as they departed. Gregory lingered, his frustration finally spilling over. "This is more than just a lapse in judgment, Abigail. It's a scandal that could destroy the monastery and the seminary alike." "I know," Abigail replied, her voice firm, "but we won't make it right by acting in haste. I'll find a way to handle this." Gregory sighed, rubbing his temples. "You'd better, because if the church finds out before you've resolved this, they won't be as forgiving." As he left, Abigail stood alone in the chapel, her gaze fixed on the altar. The weight of what she had witnessed bore down on her, and she whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, grant me wisdom. I fear I'll need it more than ever." The tranquility of the Saint Aurelia Monastery was shattered by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Through the arched windows of the dining hall, Abigail saw the black sedan cresting the hill. A sharp pang of anxiety gripped her chest. Bishop Arthur had arrived. The nuns gathered in the courtyard, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. Bishop Arthur stepped out of the car, his presence commanding yet cold. His dark robes flowed like a shadow as he surveyed the monastery with a critical eye. "Mother Abigail," he said, his voice sharp and formal as he extended a gloved hand. "Your Excellency," Abigail replied, inclining her head respectfully. Arthur's gaze swept over the gathered nuns, lingering for a moment on Sister Helena, who stood near the back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He said nothing, but the weight of his scrutiny was palpable. Once inside the monastery's meeting room, Arthur wasted no time. "I've received troubling reports," he began, his tone clipped. "Reports of broken vows, impropriety, and scandal. I trust you understand the gravity of the situation." Abigail remained composed, though her hands tightened in her lap. "Yes, Your Excellency, I assure you, I am addressing it." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Addressing it? By allowing the perpetrators to remain here unpunished? By keeping the church in the dark?" Abigail met his gaze evenly. "I believed it was prudent to gather all the facts before taking action. The situation is more complex than it appears." "Complexity does not excuse disobedience," Arthur said, his voice rising. "The church has entrusted you with the sanctity of this monastery, and you've allowed it to be defiled. If you cannot restore order, the church will intervene, and this place will be shut down." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. Abigail's heart sank, but she refused to show weakness. "Give me time, Your Excellency. I can resolve this without destroying the community we've built here." Arthur leaned back in his chair, regarding her with skepticism. "You have 6 months. If by then this monastery has not proven its commitment to the church's values, I will have no choice but to order its closure." Abigail nodded, her resolve hardening. "I understand. I will not fail." That evening, Abigail called a meeting in the chapel. The nuns and Father Gregory gathered under the flickering light of the candles. The tension was palpable, and whispers rippled through the group as they speculated about the bishop's arrival. When Abigail stepped to the front, the room fell silent. "Bishop Arthur has given us 6 months to prove that we can restore the sanctity of this monastery," she began. "If we fail, it will be closed." Gasps filled the air, followed by murmurs of alarm. Sister Agatha rose, her expression severe. "This is what comes of your leniency, Mother Abigail," she said. "You should have taken decisive action from the beginning." Abigail's gaze hardened. "And what action would that have been? Sister Agatha? Cast out the sisters who have faltered? Turn them away in shame and let the world judge them? That is not our way." "It should be," Agatha snapped. "Discipline is the foundation of faith. Discipline without compassion is hollow." Abigail replied, "These are not just rules we follow, they are vows made in trust. When that trust is broken, it is our duty to restore it, not destroy it further." Father Gregory stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Agatha, Abigail is right. Casting blame will not solve anything. We need to support each other if we are to weather this storm." Agatha's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. The next day, Bishop Arthur began his inspection. He walked the monastery's grounds with a critical eye, speaking briefly with the nuns and observing their routines. His presence was a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Meanwhile, Abigail convened a private meeting with Helena and Ethan. "The bishop will be watching you closely," she warned. "You must conduct yourselves with the utmost humility. This is not just about your actions anymore. It's about the survival of this monastery." Helena nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand, Mother. I'll do whatever it takes." Ethan, though quieter, shared her determination. "We'll make this right." Despite their reassurances, Abigail knew the road ahead would not be easy. The scandal had already sown division within the community, and Arthur's looming judgment threatened to widen the rift. As the weeks passed, Abigail worked tirelessly to implement changes that would appease the bishop while preserving the essence of the monastery. She introduced new routines to foster unity among the sisters, including shared meals and open discussions. First, the changes were met with resistance, particularly from Agatha and her supporters. But gradually, the atmosphere began to shift. The nuns who had once whispered in judgment of Helena started to offer her quiet words of support. Even Agatha, though still critical, softened her tone. However, as the deadline drew nearer, new challenges arose. Rumors of the scandal had reached the nearby towns, and journalists began to appear at the gates, seeking stories. Bishop Arthur, furious at the unwanted attention, confronted Abigail. "This is precisely why such indiscretions cannot be tolerated," he said. "Your failure to contain this has brought shame upon the church." Abigail stood her ground. "Your Excellency, I cannot control what the world chooses to see. All I can do is show them the strength of our faith." Arthur scoffed but said nothing more. In the final weeks of the 6-month period, tensions reached their peak. Helena went into labor prematurely, and the entire monastery rallied to help her. Abigail stayed by her side through the long, harrowing hours. When the baby's cries finally filled the room, a wave of relief washed over everyone. Holding the newborn in her arms, Abigail whispered, "This is a new beginning for all of us." But even as joy filled the monastery, Abigail knew the real test was yet to come. The monastery, once steeped in quiet rituals, now buzzed with cautious optimism after the birth of Sister Helena's child. Yet the joy was fleeting. Abigail knew the community's fragile peace hung by a thread, and the presence of Bishop Arthur loomed over them like a storm cloud. Sister Helena and Ethan were allowed temporary accommodations within the monastery while they adjusted to their new roles as parents. Their days were filled with caring for the infant, but the whispers among the other nuns persisted. Some spoke with warmth, while others, like Sister Agatha and her supporters, saw the situation as a stain on the monastery's sanctity. One evening, during a communal meal, Agatha stood to address the group. "Mother Abigail," she began, her voice clear and deliberate, "the presence of Helena, Ethan, and their child disrupts the sanctity of our vows. How can we claim to be a house of God if we allow such transgressions to reside within these walls?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Abigail. She rose slowly, meeting Agatha's piercing gaze. "Helena and Ethan have chosen to face their mistakes with humility and responsibility," Abigail said firmly. "That is not disruption, Sister Agatha. That is redemption. But their presence invites scrutiny, not redemption," Agatha countered. "The bishop himself has seen the strain this has brought upon us." Before Abigail could respond, Sister Helena, clutching her child, stood shakily. "I never meant to cause harm," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken my vows, but I've also learned that love doesn't diminish faith. It deepens it." The tension in the room was palpable. Father Gregory, who had been observing quietly, finally spoke. Helena's words reflect something we must all consider. The rules we follow are meant to guide us closer to God, but they cannot erase our humanity. Agatha sat down, her expression unreadable, and the meal continued in uneasy silence. Meanwhile, the scandal surrounding the monastery had spread to nearby towns. Reporters gathered near the gates, and articles began to appear questioning the relevance of such traditional institutions in the modern world. Bishop Arthur, infuriated by the negative attention, summoned Abigail for a private meeting. "This is unacceptable," he said, slamming a newspaper onto the table. The headline read, "Monastery Under Fire. Scandal in the Saint Aurelia Order." This monastery is becoming a symbol of failure, not faith. Abigail remained calm, though the criticism stung. "Your Excellency, these reports do not define us. They only reflect the challenges we face and how we choose to rise above them." Arthur leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "If you cannot control this narrative, Mother Abigail, the Church will have no choice but to shut this place down." As Arthur's words hung in the air, Abigail felt a weight settle heavily on her shoulders. The community she had spent years nurturing was slipping through her fingers, while the monastery grappled with external pressures. The challenges for the new couples were just beginning. Helena and Ethan struggled to balance their responsibilities as new parents while facing judgment from their peers. One evening, Abigail found Ethan sitting alone in the garden, his head in his hands. "Ethan," she said softly, sitting beside him, "what troubles you?" He sighed deeply. "I thought we could endure this, but everywhere I turn, there's someone whispering about us, someone judging us. I feel like we'll never be accepted." Abigail placed a hand on his shoulder. "Acceptance is not given freely, Ethan. It's earned. Show them through your actions that you are worthy of their trust. You are not alone in this." Her words brought him a small measure of comfort, but Abigail knew their journey would be fraught with doubt and hardship. One night, disaster struck. As the monastery settled into its evening prayers, the smell of smoke filled the air. Flames erupted in one of the side wings, spreading quickly through the ancient wooden beams. Panic swept through the community as nuns and seminarians rushed to evacuate. Abigail, holding a lantern, called out orders to ensure everyone's safety. But amidst the chaos, she realized that Helena and her child were missing. Without hesitation, she rushed back into the burning building, her heart pounding with fear. She found Helena in the nursery, frantically trying to calm the crying baby. Smoke filled the room, and the heat was unbearable. "Helena, we must go now," Abigail shouted, grabbing her arm. Helena hesitated, looking at the baby's belongings scattered around the room. "Leave them," Abigail commanded. Together, they made their way through the smoke-filled corridors, coughing and shielding the infant as debris fell around them. When they finally emerged into the courtyard, the community erupted in relief. The fire was eventually extinguished, but the damage was severe. The wing that housed the novices was destroyed, along with many of the monastery's ancient records and artifacts. In the aftermath of the fire, tensions flared. Agatha publicly accused Abigail of negligence. "This fire is a sign of God's disapproval," she declared during a gathering in the chapel. "We've strayed too far from our purpose, and this is the consequence." Abigail, though exhausted, stood her ground. This fire was a tragedy, not a punishment. If we let fear and blame guide us, we will lose everything this monastery stands for. Agatha's accusations planted seeds of doubt among some of the nuns, but others rallied behind Abigail, moved by her bravery during the fire. Despite the loss, the community came together to rebuild. The nuns and seminarians worked side by side to clear debris and restore what they could. Helena and Ethan, now symbols of hope for the monastery, took an active role in the efforts. As Abigail watched the community rebuild, she felt a glimmer of hope, but she also knew that the true test of their resilience was yet to come. The fire left the Saint Aurelia Monastery in ruins, both physically and emotionally. Though the flames had been extinguished, their effects lingered, stirring up unresolved tensions and fear. The once serene community now bore the scars of division, with doubts about Mother Abigail's leadership festering among certain nuns, led by Sister Agatha. But Abigail had no time to wallow. The monastery's survival was at stake, and the 6-month deadline given by Bishop Arthur loomed ever closer. The aftermath of the fire became a fertile ground for resentment. During a tense meeting in the remaining intact hall, Sister Agatha confronted Abigail once again. "This monastery has suffered enough under your misguided leadership," Agatha declared. "You've allowed scandal to take root, and now even the elements seem to rebel against us." The other nuns murmured uneasily. Abigail, though weary, stood firm. "I understand your frustration, Sister Agatha," Abigail replied evenly. "But blaming misfortune on morality is not the path to healing. We must focus on rebuilding together." Agatha, unwilling to back down, turned to the gathered sisters. "How many more tragedies must we endure before we see that this path leads to ruin?" Abigail's calm facade cracked ever so slightly. "Tragedy is not a sign of failure, Sister Agatha. It is a test of faith. We've been tested before, and we've endured. This time will be no different." Despite the divisions, the rebuilding efforts continued. But the community's fragile optimism was dealt a crushing blow when one of the seminarians, Thomas, a quiet, kind-hearted young man, collapsed while working in the monastery gardens. Dr. Allen, a physician who frequently aided the monastery, was summoned immediately, but his expression was grim as he examined Thomas. "It's his heart," he said quietly to Abigail, "a condition we couldn't have detected before. I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." Thomas passed away that night, surrounded by his fellow seminarians and the sisters. His death was a devastating reminder of the fragility of life, and it sent ripples of grief through the community. During the funeral, held in the monastery's damaged chapel, Abigail spoke with a voice heavy with sorrow. "Thomas was a man of quiet strength and unwavering faith," she said. "His life reminds us that our purpose here is not just to serve God, but to serve each other. Let us honor him by continuing the work he believed in, building a community rooted in love and resilience." The funeral brought many to tears, but it also reignited doubts. In private, Bishop Arthur approached Abigail, his expression solemn. "This tragedy underscores the instability of this community," he said. "The church cannot afford to gamble its reputation any longer." Abigail's heart sank, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Thomas's death was a tragedy, Your Excellency, but it does not define us. We are not fragile, we are human, and we are stronger for facing these trials together." Arthur was unmoved. "You have little time left, Mother Abigail. I suggest you use it wisely." With pressure mounting, Abigail decided to revisit the underground tunnel that had sparked this entire crisis. Accompanied by Father Gregory and Sister Margaret, she ventured into its depths, seeking answers or perhaps clarity. This time, as they explored deeper into the tunnel, they discovered an ancient chest tucked into an alcove. Inside were old documents and letters, written in faded ink. Father Gregory carefully examined the papers, his face growing more serious with each page. "These letters, they're from decades ago," he murmured. "They detail meetings between nuns and clergy, not for sinful purposes, but to protect persecuted members of the church during a time of political unrest." Abigail frowned. "So this passage wasn't created for scandal, but for salvation?" Gregory nodded. "Yes, but over time, its purpose seems to have been forgotten or twisted." The discovery was bittersweet. While it vindicated the tunnel's original intent, it also highlighted the dangerous potential of secrecy and unchecked tradition. Abigail knew she had to use this information carefully. Returning to the monastery, Abigail called for an emergency meeting in the chapel. The community gathered, their faces etched with grief and uncertainty. Abigail stood before them, holding one of the letters from the tunnel. "I want you all to hear this," she began, her voice steady but passionate. She read aloud a passage detailing the sacrifices made by past sisters and clergy to protect the vulnerable. When she finished, the room was silent. "This tunnel," she said, "was once a symbol of unity and courage. It was meant to bridge divides and protect those in need. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that purpose. But I believe we can reclaim it not as a secret, but as a reminder of what this monastery was meant to stand for: compassion, courage, and community." Her words struck a chord. Even Sister Agatha seemed moved. Though she remained quiet, Abigail continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "We have faced fire, loss, and division, but these trials do not break us, they define us. If we hold fast to our faith and to each other, we can rebuild stronger than before." The following morning, Bishop Arthur summoned Abigail to his temporary quarters. "Your speech was inspiring, Mother Abigail," he said, his tone neutral. "But inspiration is not enough. The Church requires results." "What do you mean, Your Excellency?" Abigail asked, though her stomach churned with dread. Arthur's expression hardened. "This monastery has 6 weeks left to demonstrate its viability. If even one more failure occurs, whether it's a scandal, a division, or another tragedy, I will have no choice but to close it permanently." Abigail's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled. "Understood, Your Excellency, but know this: the resilience of this community will not falter. I will ensure it." Arthur gave her a curt nod. "For your sake, I hope you're right." Later that day, Abigail found herself approached by Sister Agatha. The older woman hesitated before speaking. Her stern demeanor softened. "Mother Abigail," she said quietly, "I may not agree with all your decisions, but I see now that you truly care for this community." Abigail was taken aback. "Thank you, Sister Agatha. That means more than you know." Agatha's voice wavered. "If you need my help in these final weeks, you'll have it. Not for you, but for the monastery." Abigail nodded, a glimmer of hope breaking through her weariness. "Together, we'll see this through." With Bishop Arthur's ultimatum looming over her, Mother Abigail threw herself into the task of stabilizing the monastery. She knew that more than infrastructure needed rebuilding. The community's fractured trust and the monastery's tarnished reputation also demanded her attention. She began with a bold decision: open dialogue. Abigail invited the nuns and seminarians to share their fears, hopes, and frustrations in a series of open forums. The discussions were tense at first, but as the days passed, honesty began to flow. One evening, in the dimly lit chapel, Sister Helena stood to speak. Holding her newborn tightly, she addressed the gathered community. "I know I've caused pain," she began, her voice trembling. "I broke my vows, and I've struggled every day with guilt. But this child, he's not a mistake. He's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there can be light." Some nodded, their expressions softening. Others remained skeptical, but the raw emotion in Helena's words was undeniable. Next, Ethan rose. His voice, though steady, carried a hint of nervousness. "When I joined the seminary, I thought I understood what it meant to serve God," he said. "But I've come to realize that faith isn't about denying who we are. It's about embracing the humanity God gave us. Helena and I didn't plan this, but we're committed to making it right." Father Gregory, standing near the back, added quietly, "Redemption is not the absence of failure. It's the courage to rise after falling." The room was silent for a long moment before Sister Agatha, to everyone's surprise, spoke. "I've judged harshly," she admitted, her voice unusually soft. "Perhaps too harshly, but I see now that the path forward requires more than discipline. It requires understanding." Inspired by the growing unity, Abigail proposed a radical plan: allow the couples to marry. Abigail suggested that those who had broken their vows but demonstrated true commitment to one another be allowed to wed and leave the monastery with the Church's blessing. introduce mentorship, to support those who wish to remain. Abigail proposed pairing senior nuns with novices to foster guidance and understanding. Engage the community. Abigail planned to open the monastery's doors to the surrounding town, hosting charity events and prayer gatherings to rebuild trust and connection. The proposals sparked heated debates. "This is unprecedented," one nun exclaimed. "It's blasphemy to permit marriages here," said another. But Abigail stood firm. "If we cling to rigid tradition without compassion, we risk losing everything we stand for. Faith evolves, just as we do." With only 3 weeks remaining, Bishop Arthur returned to evaluate the monastery's progress. Abigail greeted him at the gates, her nerves carefully hidden behind a composed facade. "I trust there have been improvements," Arthur said as he entered. "There have, Your Excellency," Abigail replied, "though the path has not been without challenges." Arthur spent the next 2 days observing the monastery. He attended prayer sessions, spoke privately with several nuns, and reviewed Abigail's reform proposals, though he offered little feedback. His furrowed brow and stern demeanor suggested skepticism. On the final evening of his visit, Abigail invited Arthur to an open forum with the community. The nuns and seminarians gathered in the chapel, their faces a mix of apprehension and hope. Abigail began by addressing the group. "This monastery has faced trials unlike any before," she said. "But these trials have shown us the strength of our faith and the need for change. Tonight, I invite you all to share your thoughts with Bishop Arthur. Show him who we truly are." Sister Helena was the first to speak, holding her child as she stood. "Your Excellency, I know I've broken the rules, but I've also learned the importance of accountability. I love my child, and I love my faith. I only ask for the chance to honor both." Next, Sister Agatha rose. Her expression was conflicted, but her voice was clear. "I've served this monastery for decades," she said, "and for years, I believed that discipline alone would uphold our sanctity. But I see now that compassion must guide discipline. Without it, we lose not just ourselves, but our purpose." Father Gregory added, "The Church is strongest when it lifts people up, not when it condemns them. This community has shown me that redemption is possible, even in the face of failure." Finally, Ethan spoke. "I know I'm not what you'd expect from a seminarian, Your Excellency," he said, "but I believe God brought Helena and me together for a reason. We're not asking to escape judgment. We're asking for the chance to live our faith differently." The testimonies concluded, and all eyes turned to Arthur. He stood slowly, his expression inscrutable. "I have heard your words," he began, his voice echoing in the chapel. "And while I remain deeply troubled by the events that have transpired here, I cannot deny the sincerity of your efforts to atone." The room held its breath as he continued. "Mother Abigail, your reforms are unconventional. They challenge long-standing traditions, but perhaps, in this instance, tradition alone is not enough. I will allow your plan to proceed." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, but Arthur raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "However," he said sternly, "this monastery will remain under strict scrutiny. If any further failures occur, I will have no choice but to close it permanently." Abigail inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Excellency. We will not let you down." In the days following Arthur's departure, the monastery began implementing Abigail's reforms. The couples prepared for their marriages. The mentorship program was launched, and the community events brought a renewed sense of purpose. But Abigail knew their journey was far from over. As she watched Helena and Ethan exchange quiet smiles during a prayer session, she felt both pride and apprehension. "This is only the beginning," she murmured to herself. "But it's a start." Weeks passed, and the Saint Aurelia Monastery slowly began to regain a sense of stability. The nuns and seminarians adjusted to the reforms, while the community's outreach efforts brought tentative goodwill from the surrounding towns. The couples preparing for marriage were a symbol of this fragile progress. Yet their path was anything but smooth. Helena and Ethan, despite their resolve, found themselves struggling with the pressures of parenthood and judgment. One evening, Abigail found Helena sitting in the garden, her child asleep in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Helena," Abigail said gently as she approached. "What's wrong?" Helena hesitated, then sighed. "It's Ethan. He's been distant lately. I think the strain is too much for him." Abigail placed a comforting hand on Helena's shoulder. "Love is not without its trials, but if it is true, it will endure. Speak to him. Helena, don't let silence grow between you." That night, Helena and Ethan had their first honest conversation in weeks. Though their words were raw and emotional, it marked the beginning of healing for their relationship. Elsewhere in the monastery, another couple faced even greater challenges. Clara, a young nun who had left her vows to marry a seminarian named David, grew increasingly frustrated with his inability to find work outside the seminary. Their arguments became louder, their once tender connection strained. Abigail intervened after hearing their voices raised one evening. She sat with them in their modest quarters, listening patiently as Clara vented her frustrations and David expressed his feelings of inadequacy. "You both chose this path together," Abigail said, "and together, you must face its challenges. Lean on each other, not away from one another." Her words brought a moment of clarity, and though their struggles didn't disappear overnight, Clara and David began taking small steps toward reconciliation. The monastery's outreach efforts bore fruit. Weekly charity events drew townspeople back to the monastery, fostering a cautious but growing sense of trust. Donations of food, materials, and funds began trickling in, helping to repair the fire-damaged wing. One afternoon, Abigail oversaw a gathering in the courtyard where townspeople, nuns, and seminarians worked side by side to plant a new garden. As Helena and Ethan played with their child nearby, Abigail felt a rare moment of peace. Sister Agatha approached, her usual sternness softened. "You've done well, Mother Abigail," she admitted reluctantly. "Even I can't deny the changes here." Abigail smiled faintly. "It's not my doing, Agatha, it's theirs. They've shown me what this community is capable of when we trust each other." However, the monastery's progress was not without setbacks. One evening, Abigail received word that Bishop Arthur would return early to evaluate their progress. The news spread quickly, and tension rippled through the community. "Do you think he'll shut us down?" Helena asked Abigail anxiously. "I don't know," Abigail admitted, "but we must continue to show him that this monastery is worth saving." As the bishop's arrival approached, a sudden tragedy struck. One of the newly married seminarians, Thomas, collapsed while working in the fields. Despite Dr. Allen's efforts, Thomas passed away from a previously undetected heart condition. The loss devastated the community. During the funeral, Abigail addressed the gathered nuns and seminarians with a heavy heart. "Thomas's life was a testament to faith and perseverance," she said. "He reminded us that even in the face of hardship, we can find strength. Let us honor him by continuing the work he believed in." When Bishop Arthur arrived, his demeanor was as stern as ever. He spent 2 days conducting interviews with the nuns and seminarians, reviewing Abigail's reforms, and inspecting the monastery's progress. Though his expressions betrayed little, his silence spoke volumes. On the final evening, Arthur called a meeting in the chapel. The nuns, seminarians, and married couples gathered anxiously as Arthur stood before them. "I have seen much during my visit," he began, his voice measured. "This community has faced trials that would have broken many, yet you have endured." A murmur of relief rippled through the room, but Arthur raised a hand to silence it. "Endurance alone is not enough," he continued. "This monastery's survival depends on its ability to thrive, not just spiritually, but as a beacon of faith for others." Arthur turned to Abigail. "Mother Abigail, your reforms have been unconventional. They challenge traditions that have stood for centuries. Yet, they have also shown me that faith is not static. It grows, just as we do. Abigail's breath caught as Arthur paused. "I will allow this monastery to remain open," he said at last. "But know this, the church will continue to scrutinize your actions, any further failure, and I will have no choice but to close it permanently." The room erupted in murmurs, some relieved, others apprehensive. Abigail stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Thank you, Your Excellency. I will not let you down." As Arthur departed, the community gathered in the courtyard, their emotions a mixture of relief and trepidation. Abigail addressed them, her voice filled with quiet determination. "This is not the end of our journey," she said. "It is a chance to begin anew. Let us move forward with faith, love, and unity." The nuns and seminarians dispersed, their spirits buoyed by Abigail's words. But as she watched them go, Abigail knew that the real work had only just begun. The morning after Bishop Arthur's departure, the monastery seemed to exhale in collective relief. The sky was clear, sunlight streaming through the freshly repaired stained glass windows of the chapel. Despite the bishop's stern warning, hope had returned to Saint Aurelia Monastery, and with it, a renewed determination to thrive. The courtyard was transformed into a modest yet beautiful space for the first of the monastery's sanctioned weddings. Helena and Ethan stood together at the altar, their child cradled in Sister Margaret's arms. Father Gregory officiated, his voice steady as he led them through their vows. The community watched in silence. Many moved to tears. Sister Agatha, standing among the crowd, crossed her arms tightly, but her expression softened as the couple exchanged rings. When the ceremony concluded, the gathered nuns and seminarians broke into quiet applause. Abigail approached Helena and Ethan, placing a gentle hand on Helena's shoulder. "You've come so far," Abigail said. "May your love continue to strengthen your faith." "Thank you, Mother Abigail," Helena replied, her eyes brimming with tears. "We wouldn't be here without you." As more couples prepared for their weddings, Abigail focused on implementing the other reforms she had proposed. The mentorship program, pairing senior nuns with novices, quickly became a cornerstone of the monastery's culture. One afternoon, Abigail observed Sister Agatha mentoring a young novice named Beatrice. Beatrice, hesitant at first, gradually opened up under Agatha's guidance. "I didn't think I belonged here," Beatrice admitted, "but your wisdom has helped me see that faith isn't about perfection, it's about persistence." Agatha's stern demeanor softened further. "Faith is tested every day, child. What matters is how we choose to respond." The mentorship program not only strengthened bonds within the community but also helped rebuild trust in the monastery's purpose. The monastery's outreach efforts flourished. Weekly charity events brought townspeople to the monastery, where they participated in prayers, meals, and workshops led by the nuns and seminarians. Slowly, the negative reputation that had plagued Saint Aurelia began to fade, replaced by admiration for its resilience and compassion. During one such event, a young couple approached Abigail. "Mother Abigail," the woman said, "we read about your monastery in the paper. Your story gave us the courage to seek help for our marriage." Abigail smiled warmly. "You're always welcome here. Faith grows strongest when we share it with others." Despite the progress, challenges persisted. One evening, Abigail was summoned to the quarters of Clara and David, who had been struggling to adapt to their new lives outside the seminary. When Abigail arrived, she found them in the midst of an argument. Clara sat on the bed, tears streaking her face, while David stood by the window, his fists clenched. "I can't do this anymore," Clara sobbed. "We thought love would be enough, but it's not." David turned, his voice tight with frustration. "I'm trying, Clara. I'm doing everything I can, but nothing seems to work." Abigail stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "Both of you, sit down," she said. As they reluctantly obeyed, Abigail continued, "Love is not a cure-all. It's a commitment, one that requires effort, patience, and understanding. You chose this path together, and now you must walk it together. Lean on your faith, and lean on each other." Her words brought a tentative peace, and though Clara and David's journey remained uncertain, they resolved to keep trying. Late one night, Abigail knelt in the chapel, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. The flickering candles cast long shadows on the walls, and the silence was heavy with her thoughts. "Lord," she whispered, "I've done all I can to guide this community, but the road ahead is long, and the weight is heavy. Grant me the strength to continue, and the wisdom to lead them toward your light." Her prayer was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. She turned to see Sister Agatha standing in the doorway. "Mother Abigail," Agatha said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I wanted to thank you." Abigail rose slowly. "For what, sister?" "For showing me that faith is not about control," Agatha replied. "It's about trust in God and in each other." The two women exchanged a quiet, understanding look. The animosity between them finally dissolved. As the weeks turned into months, Saint Aurelia Monastery began to thrive once more. The married couples found their footing, supported by the community and their faith. The mentorship program flourished, and the monastery's reputation as a place of redemption and compassion spread beyond the town. Bishop Arthur returned for a final inspection. As he walked through the monastery, observing its renewed sense of purpose, he spoke to Abigail privately. "You've done well, Mother Abigail," he admitted, though his tone remained measured. "This monastery stands as a testament to faith's resilience. But remember, this is only the beginning." Abigail inclined her head. "I understand, Your Excellency. We will continue to build upon this foundation, no matter the challenges." One evening, as the sun set over the monastery, Abigail stood in the courtyard, watching the nuns and seminarians work together to tend the garden. Nearby, Helena and Ethan played with their child, their laughter echoing softly. Sister Margaret approached, her expression thoughtful. "You've done it, Abigail," she said. "You've given this community a second chance." Abigail smiled faintly. "No, Margaret, they've done it. I simply believed in them." As the first stars appeared in the sky, Abigail whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for guiding us through the darkness. May we continue to grow in your light." The Saint Aurelia Monastery stood as a beacon of hope, a place where faith, love, and redemption intertwined to create something stronger than tradition alone, a community united by compassion and resilience.